Welcome, everyone, to the Help Dr. Fantastic and the Planet webcast. Today, we're very honored to have the nuclear proctalogist, and hopefully we find some answers on how to solve, which you know should already know if you watched previous episodes, of the extinction level event that's occurring on the planet from the meltdown of three of the largest nuclear reactors on the planet in Fukushima, Japan, which was caused by an earthquake, which created a tsunami, and the friggin' geniuses who designed it put the backup generators for the electricity to cool the plant in the basement. And I can't hear Dana.
Yeah, you dropped out that at the end of it there. It's okay. I got a good connection here.
But you heard me?
I didn't hear the very end of you, and you're breaking.
Okay, so what do you know about the Fukushima? Bring us up to speed on your end of it.
Japan, from what the evidence shows, is that the earthquake caused most of the meltdowns to happen by separating the water intake. It needs 1 million gallons a minute. That's 4,500 tons per minute of water. Is crucial. It's an enormous amount of water. And once the reactor starts to run away, there's no way to stop it, particularly when you're having an event like an earthquake and then a tsunami. Now, just say, for instance, the earthquake didn't cause it, but there's the evidence suggests it did. The tsunami destroyed the infrastructure for 680 miles of the coastline. And so there was no way for anything to be plugged in, for instance. And the whole problem is a culture of deception and deceit. Its legacy of the nuclear is just deception. And so there was nobody competent, really, to make decisions over the last couple of decades. And the old crew that originally started this project up, I'm sure never envisioned it to run away like it has, if there was any good intentions at all. So the whole history of nuclear, the whole legacy of nuclear, human testing, animal testing, there's billions of animals have been exterminated testing nuclear. None has ever been cured. And so we see the same results in the hospital when people go there for chemo. We have studies showing 3% of chemo patients live longer without it than they would with it. And so if you don't have chemo, apparently it's the studies have asked the question of why are they still doing chemo when there's only a 3%, 2.3 in America, and it's not even 3%, and 1.9 in Australia survival rate with chemo. So chemo, so basically the whole thing is a deception. They knew the dangers of it. Pregnant women, there was 800 pregnant women were given vitamin drinks, told they were vitamin drinks and vitamin injections from doctors in the United States in just one experiment. And these were plutonium and americium, neptunium, really bad hot particles. And when they died from these illnesses and diseases, there's around 1,800 illnesses and diseases show up before cancer. But as these victims were dying, the pregnant women and their children, they would dig the corpses up after and cremate them and sniff the air for plutonium, which is named after the devil. But a single atom in your body attacks with white blood cells, and so it's forever. So if you cut your finger, you get white blood cells will come out and try to repair it, and 7 days later, the white blood cell count will go away, and the red blood cells carrying nutrients and oxygen throughout your body comes back up. But if you got radiation in your body, you have a depleted oxygen and nutrition ability, and less blood platelet and blood oxygen is leaves you open to pathogens and viruses and illnesses and autoimmune deficiencies and injuries and illnesses. And so heart disease, lung problems, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline. You have Alzheimer's, dementia, autism. There's 6 out of 10 children right now in Fukushima have diabetes. This is one of the things that'll show up really quick. And leukemia is when you have a high white blood cell count. So the more radioactive food you eat, the more likely it is leukemia is going to show up before it. And so this accident was predictable a very long time ago, that these illnesses and everything would happen if you did have an accident, because you put the reactor cores at the top of these buildings in Japan. Chernobyl was 100th the size of the reactors, each reactor in Japan. So the reactors in Japan had reactor cores stored on the roof for decades, And then if anything happens, you can never get near the reactor core. So you have a really incredible multi-reactor meltdown in one building. And so the gamma shines, the X-rays, the neutrons means Harvard University, Yale University, Stanford University, Oxford University, MIT University. I've studied them all. None of them went there. And their original presentations to the world right after the accident, I dissected them forensically and showed these people to be just friends of the nuclear industry, attempting to just and that's where it all started. You know, all these major institutions is who you're supposed to turn to when something happens. They lied to everybody about the effects, about the implications, and actually about the damage at the time that was going on, downplayed it. And then so people were disarmed. The planet never had a chance. We turned to the best institutions looking to see if there was an issue, and they lied to everybody nonstop, and so they left it up in presentations on their sites, shows the lie, and then the lies have now continued on. So we're into this never-ending lie where it didn't happen. It's harmless, innocuous, it's benign. It's like a banana, it's like a potato chip, it's like walking in sunshine, and so people become disassociated from the truth when this happens in increments over decades. And when Fukushima happened, it was ripe for just, we were supposed to react, basically. We were supposed to, every university on the planet was supposed to go to work together. We were supposed to treat it like it was a meteorite coming at our planet, and everybody was now finally going to drop our bigotry and our racism and our prejudice and work together as one to solve humanity's and the other 8 million species. We are the stewards of 8 million species, and that the obligation is on us to do the job. And if we just pay contractors or pretend that there's a government agency is going to fulfill such an incredible demanding position, you know, then who's to blame? It's us again. And so we are the checks and balances, but we don't see that. All we see is the public relation firms have filled in the gaps, and then there's nobody out there really comprehending the actual enormity of what we're looking at. And so I covered thousands of headlines about Fukushima originally and the effects upon the ocean. And of course, the ocean produces 50% of the oxygen on the planet. This is the Pacific Ocean. And so what I done was I launched, after covering thousands of headlines, I launched expeditions to verify, because I have thousands of hours underwater as a commercial diver. Before that, I had 30,000 hooks. I had 120 gill nets. I come from a area that still has no automobiles, and so I was raised and bred for the wildlife and for Mother Nature and to survive in that environment, and I did. And I was you know, I never ever thought there would be something else in my life. I always thought that the ocean was my life. And when I went out and surveyed the coastline in British Columbia, Canada, after covering thousands of headlines for a year straight, what I discovered was out of the 7,000 species, after 260 days of going throughout the coastline of North America, from one end of British Columbia to the other end, the species were missing. And so were the birds. And then we had confirmation this was happening, but we had to go out and actually prove it for ourselves. And so I took hundreds of thousands of pictures and documentation, and we dragged underwater cameras. Originally, I had 4 people out on the ocean. I never even went on the ocean myself for the first few months. I raised the money and provided, got the website up and put the documentation up on the website that they were bringing in an attempt to try to finish out the whole coastline to see if this, we knew it was symmetrical, but we wanted to prove it, obviously. We wanted to see if there was any oases left out there. Now, British Columbia, if you don't understand that, the tidal zones, there's 26,000 islands in this, 26,000 islands. And so it's an incredible, dangerous place. That's what's out of the water with trees on it. And there's millions of sunkers. You have a high tide exchange, 15 to 24 feet. And so it's a very dangerous coastline. And so you have to be methodical, and safety always comes first. I have washed up on the rocks and hurricanes while I was out there and had to do certain parts of the coastline again because I wrecked and had to raise the money and repair and rebuild everything several times. But we went from one end of the coastline to the other end of the coastline. What we discovered for sure was an extinction event. We repeated that expedition. We documented everything pre-Fukushima, post-Fukushima. And so what we're looking at is trying to find a way forward. And of course, the biggest obstacle is this constant lying, this constant downplaying, this constant regurgitating of the lies from every direction. It's understandable because people are bombarded with the lies. I get that, how a lot of people mean well, but they end up repeating the lies because they're not able to, they don't understand the difference. And so I try to fill another gap when I'm not on the ocean. I was out for 4 months this year, 120 days, 1 day ashore, and I took a brutal beating. It's very difficult to do it, let alone to find the money to do it right. And so we do the best we can, and we need to know, the planet needs to know for sure, is there any recovery? And what we see now is even worse than the last expeditions, which means that the ocean can't recover for sure, and that we'll never see those species again, and that the 4 million species that are residents to the Pacific Ocean didn't recede the coastline. They didn't take advantage of the vacant land, the real estate. So the tidal zones, you would expect to find up to 7,000 species. That would be, say, 700 algae, 78 species of sea anemones. They come in multiple colors for each species. These are the very visible species we're going to talk about. 76 species of sponges, and they're beautiful, incredible diversity in colors. There was 76 species of starfish. Each species come in multiple colors. There was this incredible diversity of shellfish, like razorback clams, little necks, manila clams. There was gooey ducks, which is a big clam. There was oysters and scallops. There was this incredible diversity of whelks and snails and mollusks. And so it was a very slippery, dangerous job to go from low tide to high tide anywhere on the coastline, because we don't get icebergs in the winter. Our coastline doesn't freeze. It's a tropical coastline. And so you have this genetic superior selection all the way up to the low tide, all the way up to the high tide zone. At the high tide zone, there was this incredible multiple foot band through the whole coastline of species that live at the high tide line in harmony. There was 30,000 insects. And so when I went up this time, I only seen 3,000 birds total. You would expect to see several million, up to 5,000 per square mile of the whole coastline, especially during the summer. And I seen 3,000. Most of them was in two little tiny places behind two islands, and the rest of the coastline was naked. And so I have thousands and thousands and thousands of hours underwater, and I'm very familiar with this coastline. This is why I've done what I've done. I absolutely love the ocean, love the Mother Nature, and I excelled in that environment. But that environment was my friend too, and that environment is now gone, and the lies are still continuing. So,
are you hearing 70% of the Pacific is irradiated? Is that number figure you know?
All of the Pacific was irradiated within 7 days, and this was demonstrated by the plume models from the Norwegian Institute of Air Research, from Switzerland's major, from France, from NOAA in America. Even Health Canada in Canada had made models based upon the venting. When there was no venting, the buildings had detonated. Even the helicopters couldn't go in and dump water, so there was no venting. So all the inventories have to be put into the models, but they weren't. And so that full range of isotopes, they only talk about cesium isotopes like cesium-134 and 137 and iodine-131. And if you look up studies on that, what you'll find out is they are what they call a tracer. And so if you find iodine-131, and they did in the rainwater over here in North America at 20 million becquerels per liter, but that would mean also that you would have found 10 times more iodine-132 in that same liter. You would have found 30 times more iodine-133 in that same liter Iodine 132 and 133 ionizes and radiates your thyroid gland 9 times more effective than the 131. There would have been 31 times more iodine, 129, and that was recorded with 220 million atoms per liter of rainwater from California. We've seen 1,500 sulfur peroxide hydrogen buckyball atoms made from the sulfur spraying salt water on these 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperature core meltdowns. You atomize an aerosol, everything like the steel and rebar and cement, and then the salt water is washing all that down because the reactor core had burnt down into the earth. That's ionized and radiated and atomized in aerosol and released into the environment. And you need, adverse conditions to see it, or cold weather to see it as, you'll see it as steam. Now, the Earth is cracked at Fukushima plant, and I'll come back to your question about the Pacific in a second. But the Earth is cracked at Pacific, at Fukushima. The core has gone down in the Earth. The Earth, when it hits water, a liter of water expands 1,100 feet per second. And so when it hits a big body of water, it splits the Earth. And then the steam that's coming up there is the ionized and radiated, atomized and aerosol water and rocks and rebar and steel. That's coming up there at 10 sieverts an hour, but that's what the Geiger counter's top number. These are lethal doses throughout the site coming out of the ground. And so the whole site is covered. So none of the major institutions have ever went near the place because these are lethal doses just to run through there. And so the Pacific Ocean, you can't have what I found, the extinction event in my part of the coastline, British Columbia, Canada, all the way to Alaska. You can't have that only there. It has to be the entire Pacific. It can't be just to the one spot. But if you break certain parts of the food chain, everything else has to collapse at some point. And so the phytoplankton, which is the basis of the food chain, the basis of the oxygen chain, the basis of the carbon sequestering chain, was wiped out because it's the most vulnerable. And the phytoplankton in the Pacific Ocean, so a glass of salt water would generally have 1 billion creatures in it. And 90 to 100 million of that would have been the phytoplankton. And the phytoplankton is generally, a lot of people will only consider it as plants, which is the basis of the food chain. But it's not. Say, for instance, an oyster will lay 11 million eggs. That's considered phytoplankton until they get into a real larvae stage. And same thing for rockfish, might lay 700,000 eggs. They're considered phytoplankton. All the mussel and sea cucumbers and sea urchins and everything else, they milk the ocean into the ocean. And that's considered phytoplankton because it's food for further up the food chain until it gets up to the krill. And then the krill are feeding the anchovies and the squid and the sardines and the mackerel and the squid and everything else. And that's feeding the seals and the sea lions and everything else, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So bioaccumulates as it works its way up the food chain to the point of where clams will bioaccumulate, say, 115,000 times. And so these are, we see, like starfish use the ocean water as blood, like we use blood, right? And so they were affected immediately, and they come out and claimed it as a melting syndrome or something like this. I read all the papers, and then so when you had Ebola, they didn't recognize it when it became a big issue, a big population, but they took pictures of the virus and they put it on the international news. And scientists who studied it decades ago recognized it as Ebola and had some really good input that was able to direct people. But when it comes to the mystery viruses and mystery pathogens for the Pacific Ocean, for the mass die-offs, we don't see any pictures, or in the papers, the peer-reviewed academic studies, they don't provide any pictures of the mystery viruses, pathogens allegedly killing the wildlife. They keep blaming it on these mysteries. And so we've done the whole coastline, and there is no species, just a handful of species left, and they're not healthy. They're going to disappear pretty quick. And all the whales are emaciated. All the birds were emaciated that died. We shipped 500,000 die up in Alaska of common murres. Another die off the year before was a Cassini auklets of about 500,000 of these birds. And they showed no food in their stomach. They were completely empty. They didn't have any viruses in their pathogens. They didn't have any injuries or illnesses. They didn't have diseases or injuries. They had starved to death. And this is symmetrical across the board for the seals. They were emaciated, just bags of bones. They were coming ashore, the seals, baby seals, and they're eating the rocks. Now, normally this is what they would do if the mother had died. They would come into the shallow water, and it would be full of all these life I was talking about earlier. And they would be attached to rocks, and they would eat the rocks. They get all these nutrients, and they would excrete the rocks. But there's nothing on the rocks, so they eat the rocks and they die with rocks in them. But they're completely emaciated. And this is right. We just seen recently in the last couple of days in New Zealand and Australia, like all around New Zealand was mass die-offs of whales in a short period of time. It's not like they all washed up on one beach. It was all around this archipelago. And what could cause all these animals to die at the one time? It's the same as the birds, where they were emaciated and they went as far as they could and they couldn't find food, and then they died. And so normally the birds could land at low tide, and there would be another, not just the 7,000 species that I talk about that are highly visible to me and you, but there's another 6,000 species of invertebrates with the backbones that the migratory birds are dependent upon, also besides the other species. And they are like little shrimp in that. And so there was 480 species of worms that used to be in these tidal zones, 30,000 insects in these tidal zones, and that whole coastline was just this incredible diversity, amazing, just wonderful. And now it's totally destroyed forever. It's like the moon, literally, for most of the coastline. It's a shock to someone like me who's very familiar, and it's horrifying to anybody that's in the know. And so the problem is they got this culture of lying in the nuclear industry. And this lying, the minute you tell the truth, then everybody's going to say, well, you just lied to us and be angry. And so they're terrified, I would hope anyway. Like, I like to feel there's good out there in everybody. But what you're seeing is the lies is doing us, because there's nobody treating it with the urgency that everybody's out there screeching that is, trying to blame it on something else, calling it global warming.
Most people don't even know about the Fukushima.
Right.
For the last couple of weeks that we've been into it, I've been asking everybody I talk to, and I talk to dozens and dozens of people every day. Most people never even heard the name. Yeah. Most.
No, that's true. Yeah. Not here in Canada, though. Everybody seems to know in Canada, but they got to go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I was just going to say that's our whole mission, and that's why it's fantastic that you're on the show, because you've got a wealth of knowledge firsthand, and hopefully we can tie your site to ours, and people can go see all the pictures. I imagine all the pictures are on your website.
Indeed,
yeah. This isn't fake news. You didn't Photoshop thousands of pictures, hopefully. So, our mission to save the planet, and we certainly hope you join our team, is phase one is to tell the truth. Get the word out and tell everyone what's going on. Phase one. Now, you seem to have a couple of solutions for phase two, which is there may be solutions, because CBS News, even though everyone's hiding it, CBS News has a thing called 60 Minutes. It's a very, very big show. They actually came out on Thursday or Tuesday, whenever it was, and had an update on Fukushima. And the one expert on the show said it's going to be 40 to 100 years just to fix the Fukushima problem. So that's a travesty, just listening to hear that. But other people we're talking to, and Thunder is a genius, think there are solutions. So the phase two is, let's try to figure out what the solutions are. And phase three, I think we have a friend that has a fund up to $20 billion to address the situation. So I think if we come up with a solution, we'll have the funding for it. But so now let's segue. It's enough depressing news about the problem. You said you might have some solutions that are pretty much available. What do you got?
Well, the solutions will never see the light of day, because you got to throw the industry on its head. So the solution is the truth, and then the truth means that Harvard University has to go into Fukushima, and Yale University got to go there, and Stanford, and Rotterdam got to go there, and MIT and their academics and alumni and students, instead of the homeless and the destitute and the victims of society and the immigrants who don't speak the language. So there's solutions. We got tons of solutions. The industry is full of it. We have the resources. We got the manpower. We have the brain power. We even have the will. We just don't have the truth winning the conversation. So the minute the truth becomes common, and see that might never happen or see the later day, because they got to admit they lied. But what it is you got to send in Harvard University, you got to send in Stanford University and MIT University, and every nuclear college on the planet has to set up shop right there and get busy. You know what I mean?
So, well, that's a step one, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to have a solution. That is not a solution. That's a means to the end by getting everyone involved and thinking about it. But we're hoping through Thunder's technology, quantum physics, that he could come up with a what do you call it? A biometrics. What do you call it, Thunder? That would maybe counteract. What's the word where you counteract something like Bose noise canceling headphones?
So frequency modulation, cancellation of radioactivity isomers. And once we identify that specific identified frequency, we use its, its cosine, its negative effect. So gold seems to be one of a leading candidate to contain and to block radioactivity frequency. Monatomic gold in the Ormus only sounds like the easiest way to broadcast frequencies that would cancel it, radioactivity, because at least radioactivity would be rendered inert and removed 3 seconds every minute. Well, that's a small amount, but that's a good amount to to cap this thing off and to prevent further leakage into our ocean that we're seeing. This guy knows the ocean like I know farming. So I get you. You grew up, but this is your backbone. This is your history. If you understood these things that are on the shore that are not there any longer, it's clearly the ELE is clearly the reason. So yes, absolutely, you're right on point, brother, to add tremendous knowledge to this. But as far as solutions, going, it's eradicate nuclear power from this planet.
Well, that's after we cure the Fukushima, because if we don't cure Fukushima, it won't matter if we have nuclear energy on the planet. We've got to first address this meltdown, and hopefully people learn from it and they don't put the backup generators on the ground floor or in the basement. So first and foremost, and Thunder, we talked to someone the other day that they had, I think it was Dan, that had a solution. They said within 2 weeks you can clean it up. I mean, I don't think the governments even want to address that right now, but we're on a search for it right now. I thought, and you're right, Dana, getting all the scientists together to analyze and really admit that we have a problem and start to work towards it, that is part of the solution. I was hoping you had a secret sauce or something.
Well, like the scope of the problem is you got Tokyo is destroyed, 29 million becquerels per square meter through that area of just one isotope means that's, you should never be there. And so all 14 prefectures need to be immediately dealt with, but the reactors obviously first. And so you go into the reactors, and there's only so much you can do, but you can do things. You can plant certain plants all around this area and harvest them because they'll suck up radionuclides. But that's long term. You got to get in there and you got to identify what's left. Now, you can't get within a football field of it without getting a fatal dose that could kill you weeks later or a month later or a few days later. So the minute you go within a football field of the reactors, you're committing suicide. So the solutions for that is you create, say, tanks or backhoes or tractors, and you but you can sit inside of these if you needed to by surrounding yourself with water for a shield, because like lead, you need lead and you need steel and you need, for a fallout shelter, you need 4-foot thick walls, right? But for the victims at the site, you only need a paper suit. And so none of this makes sense because you needed the 4-foot wall for fallout shelters because the radiation can pulse through 4 feet of rocks of wood or gravel or whatever the case may be. But when you send these people into the site, they're wearing paper suits. These are the victims of society. We have a lot of, there's so much documentation, but also reality dictates this. The reactors, a couple of them blew right up. Like number 3 was mixed oxide fuel. This was 2 million times worse than a common reactor. And so it threw its fuel rods all over that site. And we got lethal doses coming out of the ground from the steam. You got fuel rods all over the site under several feet of cement, pavement. And on top of that, they put steel, 5x10 steel sheets on the roads and the sidewalks, and then titanium vest on the victims. And so what happens, though, see, is if you tell the truth, and then Yale and Stanford and Harvard got to go in there, then all of a sudden they're not using paper suits no more. Then all of a sudden they're developing the robots. Then all of a sudden they're developing cameras that'll work. They haven't even developed a robot since Chernobyl that works. They don't even try. I got headlines saying that school children are trying to develop robots to go into Fukushima. But MIT got a robotic department. All the institutions out there got robotic departments, but none of them are breaching the subject. None of them are enthusiastic about their equipment or trying to get it in there. None of them are complaining about the homeless being there, that they should be there. So the minute you drive the scientists in there, preferably at gunpoint, and they don't get to come back out as far as I'm concerned, because once you go in there, you might as well stay there and die. That's what that site actually means, see? And that might seem like crazy to somebody out there that's not familiar with what I'm talking about. But you run, like the water in the tank, a liter of the water, 1 liter. If I lay that, say if I took 5 gallons out of those tanks, these are 2 sieverts per liter that they were able to measure. But if I lay that by the subway station, everybody that stands by that for a few moments will die within the next few weeks. Everybody. And you can exterminate the whole planet with 5 gallons because they got gamma shines, X-rays, and neutrons.
Now, is it true that 300 gallons of radioactive material flow into the ocean every day from the accident?
That story came from that's the original numbers of the fire department that went in there, the military, and they went in to spray water. Their hoses were 300 tons a day. That's the most. Now, the fuel pools, they ball off 120,000 liters a day. But the reactor cores need 450 tons, 4,500 tons a minute. And so in order to cool the reactor core, even if it melts, especially if it melts down, you still need 1 million gallons a minute. So they kept this 300 tons a day story alive, and they turned that into that they can build an ice wall around it and reduce the 300 tons to 75 tons a day and blah, 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 blah. They totally mongrelized what's actually going on here. Each reactor core needs 1 million gallons a minute, and they're trying to spray that down there. So
what's the number?
There's 1 million.
What would you say the number is?
I think a safe number, because you got a river behind it runs underneath it. So you're looking at millions of tons a day running out into the ocean over the fuel rods and over the reactor cores. That's the backout plan of it. You build it over bedrock, and so the reactor core goes down, hits the bedrock. Bedrocks are where the old rivers run through and will. And that washes the radioactive isotopes and keeps reactor cores medium cooled down below. And so that's their old crap plan, is they run away and then melts down and then it gets washed out into the ocean.
I've also heard that the core may be on the bottom of the ocean floor.
Yeah, well, reactor 3 might have blown itself right out into the ocean floor. They did pave the ocean floor for several miles out in front of that plant underwater. They paved it with cement. They spent like a whole year pouring cement on the ocean floor because fuel rods did detonate. They felt the explosion from reactor 3 all the way 25 miles away. An AP reporter had reported that explosion.
So they keep thinking that, like at Chernobyl, I'm told that every 5 years they have to put another layer of cement around it. So are they saying that if we encapsulate and keep encapsulating the bottom of the floor, we're actually not polluting the planet?
No. That was just to try to bring the numbers down temporarily so they can have the Olympic Games or something. It's all about cover-up. It's all about... That was the worst thing they could have done. They should have sent the robots down to retrieve it. Now they can't retrieve it. And so, no, this is not going to help it. That'll split right away. It goes into a chain reaction on its own when they touch each other. And the chain reaction's forever. So the ocean was boiling off Fukushima for a long time. They admitted that steam was coming out of the ocean out there. It was boiling. And that's because the parts of the reactor core were blown out that way, other parts were blown the other way. And that the entire food chain is polluted. And so we can't escape it even if we want to. And we got to deal with it, though. But we can come up with solutions because we have, like, see, when I say that, I'm talking about that if we tried, we'd come up with solutions. I've read so many studies, I can't possibly articulate it in one of these presentations, but there's an incredible, they've studied, academically wise, peer review, did the artificial elements way more than the natural elements from the solar system. Way more. In other words, like you say, they killed millions of animals, billions of animals worldwide, in Germany and France and India and Pakistan and Israel and Canada, United States and Russia and all the other pro-nuclear countries doing experiments. They've killed animals by the billions, and they've never cured an animal. So they studied it more than they studied any natural elements. They have an incredible amount of insight on how it works. They're not naive or gullible. They're 100% aware of what's going on. And so it appears to be 100% on purpose to let it do what it's doing. They won't go near it. And so that tells the story on its own. And the solutions, the way to get solution to a big problem is you wake up the whole planet, because there's somebody out there will come up with the right solution.
That's our phase one, is tell everyone. And this is fabulous. I'm learning so much today, and I hope everyone who watches this spreads it, because phase one is tell the truth.
You got to tell the truth
and get the word out there and get this. Now that's a good idea, Thunder. Let's get these videos sent to all the universities. We got to start spreading the word.
That's how it works. When people are aware, they come up with solutions. When I became aware, I covered over 1,000 headlines online, live shows, like 50 at a time or 100 at a time, in live presentations, trying to do exactly what we're talking about. And then that proves, it was 13,000 altogether actually, but it does prove, it proved a point. Okay, there's proof, there's something going on here. Now we're going to go out and make sure. We went out and verified and made sure. And then now the rest of my life is dedicated to doing anything I can to further and try to help the planet through this and find a way forward for the species that are left and the generations that are coming. It's our watch, right?
Yeah. And we're happy to have you on the team. It's going to take a global team effort. We just started. You've been doing it a long time, and I'm a pretty smart guy, and Thunder's a genius. We're going to do everything we can to help you, to help us, to help the planet. I'm so happy you took the time out, Dana. And again, everybody, if you're watching this, hopefully it's opened your eyes. Prove it for yourself. Go on the internet. There's lots of stuff on YouTube. But more importantly, share it. If you have any connections to universities, our phone lines are always open. 714-316-9829 is the call-in number. Monty at lmc3.com. There's lots of websites. Our website is helpussavetheplanet.com. Dana's is thenuclearproctalogist.com. We're going to link his site to ours. .org, I'm sorry, thenuclearproctalogist.org. We are helpussavetheplanet.com. And share this video with your friends, with your associates, with your enemies. Get the word out. Thunder, you want to add to that?
That was a wealth of information. I appreciate that. I'm a quick study, so I got it first round. I recommend some people maybe rewind and listen to this a few times to let it really soak in, because what I basically heard is we don't have 40 years to sit down and write a plan that could possibly take 2 centuries to expedite. We don't have that type of time. Your expertise is makes me want to get out. I gotta work harder than ever to get this done. But join the team, brother. Thank you. I'm happy to work with a guy like you.
Yeah, no, I'm here. That's what I'm here for. I'm here to help. I'm always available. Everybody worldwide, anytime.
That's fantastic. Well, everybody, be
It's
fantastic and join our team. Introduce us to anyone you can help that can get the word out. The celebrities we need to get to. We need to get to the scientists. We need to get to the billionaires, because all those billionaires with all that money aren't going to do. Their grandkids aren't going to be able to enjoy it unless they help us, help them, help
That's
the
a
planet.
fact.
Thank you, everybody, for watching. Like, subscribe, share, all those good things. Dana, you're the man. So glad to have you on the show.
God bless.
Thunder, as
Thank you.
always. Let's keep it going, guys. Thank
Take
you,
care.
everybody.
Be good.